You were never meant to hear this. Not from me, not from anyone. Because the moment you understand it, the illusion of family begins to fracture. And once it breaks, it can never be rebuilt. Picture it, the smell of roasted meat, the clatter of silver. The ritual of togetherness rehearsed like a centuries-old spell. Every holiday table across the world hides the same unspoken law. Someone must serve, so that others can feast. The first time you're chosen, it feels like love. You think, they trust me with this responsibility. But slowly the apron becomes a shackle, the praise curdles into expectation, and you realize the truth. You were never invited to sit at the table. You were groomed to keep it running. Every civilization has its kitchens, unseen rooms where devotion is boiled down into compliance. In ancient Rome, it was the slaves who prepared banquets for senators who spoke of freedom. In Victorian parlors, it was daughters taught to smile while their brothers inherited estates. And in the modern home, it's the silent child, the helpful one, whose usefulness disguises their invisibility. They'll tell you this is tradition, that gratitude is selfish, that sacrifice is sacred. But look closer. The structure of servitude is older than your surname. It's encoded in religion, reinforced by culture, and dressed up as duty. She, the forgotten one, the cook, the daughter named Marin, learned that truth too late. She thought the kitchen was her kingdom. In reality, it was her cage. When she said no for the first time, the walls trembled. Because no one at that table had ever seen the servant speak. What happens next isn't rebellion, it's revelation. Because the feast was never about food. It was about hierarchy. And when hierarchy is questioned, every smiling mask at the table begins to crack. Stay with me. The deeper we go, the more you'll see. This isn't just her story, it's a mirror for every system that keeps you obedient. They expected a feast. What they got was the end of the illusion. Marin didn't become the family cook overnight. It began with small moments, harmless requests dressed in warmth. Could you set the table? Could you help Grandma stir the gravy? Could you handle the dinner this year? You're so good at it. Each yes was a stone laid on a quiet path toward servitude. She didn't know that obedience, when repeated, becomes identity. In psychology, they call it conditioning, but in families, they call it love. That's the trick. Obedience disguised as affection. They praise the sacrifice while extracting your labor. You learn to equate exhaustion with worth, silence with peace, self-erasure with goodness. By the time Marin was 28, the holiday season wasn't joy, it was performance. Her siblings arrived like royalty, expecting plates to appear as if summoned by devotion itself. Her mother smiled proudly, telling neighbors, "Marin always handles it. She loves it." But love had nothing to do with it. It was control, woven in sugar and sentiment. And here's the terrifying part. This system repeats itself across generations. The one who serves today becomes the one who demands tomorrow. The oppressed become the enforcers. Because power unexamined is power repeated. When Marin's therapist once asked, "What would happen if you didn't cook this year?" she laughed. "They'd probably starve," she joked. She was only half wrong. Because when she finally decided not to, something far deeper than hunger began to surface. This is where you must listen closely. Because what happened next wasn't just a family argument. It was the psychological collapse of an entire belief system. December came colder than usual. Frost on the windows. Silence in the group chat. For the first time, Marin didn't send the message. "What should I bring?" Days passed. No one asked her plans because they assumed she'd be there. They assumed the machine would run itself when the text final. Lee came from her mother. It wasn't an invitation, it was an instruction. "Dinner's at 6, bring your usual." Her usual. Those two words sliced deeper than any insult. Years of effort reduced to a function. Her usual, meaning her labor, her time, her identity, already assigned to her without consent. That night, Marin sat in her dark apartment, surrounded by old recipes and the smell of dust. She felt something ancient stir inside her, not anger but clarity. She realized she'd been trained not to disappoint others, even at the cost of disappointing herself. That's the first stage of awakening, noticing how you've been programmed. So she didn't reply. And silence, her silence, began to echo louder than any confession. When Christmas Eve came, her family gathered like always. Her mother called her name twice from the kitchen doorway, pretending to sound casual. Then panic crept in. Did anyone hear from Marin? No one had, because Marin was somewhere else, not escaping but reclaiming. There's a particular power in absence. When you remove yourself from a system that feeds on your participation, that system begins to collapse. Marin didn't text, she didn't call, she didn't explain, she let them feel it, the void she used to fill. It started small, no mashed potatoes, no gravy. Then realization spread. No one knew how to coordinate the timing, how to carve the roast, how to even turn on the second oven. The illusion of family togetherness unraveled one detail at a time. By 8 p.m. her mother's voice had cracked twice. Her brother argued with his wife. Her father muttered about ungrateful kids. And somewhere miles away, Maren sat by a frozen lake, breathing. For the first time in years, she wasn't covered in flour or pretending to smile. She thought about how she'd always given warmth while receiving coldness. About how the one who provides is often the one unseen, and she realized absence was her message. Silence was her speech. They had expected a feast, she had given them truth. In the house she left behind, time began to break. At first they tried to improvise. Her sister opened a recipe app, her father burned the rolls, someone spilled wine on the tablecloth Maren had always washed by hand. By 9 p.m. the air was thick, not with aroma but tension. How could she do this to us? Her mother hissed. As if betrayal was refusing to be used, what they couldn't name was the deeper panic. The loss of control. They weren't angry about the food, they were terrified of what her absence revealed, that their unity depended on someone they'd never truly seen. Every empire hides its servants. Every system hides its foundation. Remove one stone, and the whole structure trembles, and in that trembling, truth emerges. Maren's brother was the first to speak her name with guilt instead of anger. She always did this, didn't she? Everything, even the gifts. Silence. For the first time, they saw themselves, helpless without the one they had dismissed. Guilt began to gnaw at their pride, and yet none of them called. Pride feeds on denial, but guilt is a mirror, and mirrors never lie. As midnight neared, Maren walked home to a quiet apartment, lit only by the glow of a single candle. She ate a simple meal. Bread, soup, peace, and for the first time she tasted freedom. It wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration. The kind that doesn't come from confrontation but from reclamation, of self, time, and worth. She whispered to herself, "Never again." And with that vow, the holiday curse broke. In the days that followed, messages flooded her phone. At first angry, "You embarrassed us." Then desperate, "We just wanted you with us." Maren didn't respond, because she saw it clearly now. The system wasn't personal, it was generational. Built on guilt and expectation, when one person wakes up, everyone else must face their own reflection. This is the part where most people go act, apologize, resume the pattern. But Maren didn't. She chose the harder path, staying gone. Because awakening is not rebellion. It's remembering who you were before you were trained to forget. If you've ever been the one who gives endlessly, this is your mirror too. Comment, "I choose silence" twice below to lock this transformation into your reality. Once for the old self you're burying, once for the new one being born. Weeks later, her mother arrived unannounced. Eyes tired, voice trembling. "I didn't realize what I'd done," she whispered. The apology wasn't perfect, but it was real. Sometimes absence teaches what words cannot. The feast they expected had turned into famine, of comfort, of certainty, of control. But out of that famine came understanding. Maren didn't gloat, she didn't scold, she simply said, "You expected a feast, but I gave you a lesson." Her voice didn't shake, because power reclaimed never needs to shout. The lesson wasn't cruelty, it was truth. Love without respect is hunger masquerading as care. In every family there comes a moment when the roles invert. The giver steps back, and the takers must face their emptiness. That's not punishment, it's balance. And balance, though painful, is sacred. Maren became what her ancestors could not, the one who stopped the cycle. The next Christmas she didn't cook for them, but she invited those who had no one, the lonely, the unseen, the forgotten. This time the table was full of laughter, not expectation. A new feast, built on choice, not duty. The story was never about food. It was about awakening from domesticated obedience. Every system, family, faith, nation, runs on unspoken labor. The moment the silent ones rise, the structure trembles. That is the hidden message of every revolution, whether in palaces or kitchens. Here is the truth they'll never teach you. When you stop feeding the system, it starves. When you stop obeying, it crumbles. Maren's silence devoured an illusion that had lived for decades, and if you've listened this far, you've already felt it stirring inside you too. Because this isn't just her story. It's the story of everyone who ever mistook obedience for love. So remember, they expected a feast, but the feast was them, consumed by the truth they tried to ignore. When the storm ends, it doesn't announce its departure. It just leaves, quietly, like a ghost that's had enough of haunting. That's what silence felt like for Maren, in the weeks following her awakening. The noise of obligation faded, replaced by a strange stillness. It wasn't peace at first, it was withdrawal. Because obedience is an addiction, and healing begins with the tremors of freedom. Her phone sat heavy on the table. Every ping made her pulse spike, not because she wanted to go back, but because part of her still believed she owed them something. That's how deep programming runs. They teach you that love is measured by what you give, never by what you keep. But silence, that sacred absence, began to teach her the opposite. She started to notice things, the way her breath moved differently when she was rushing. How sunlight pooled across the floor at noon. How her heartbeat slowed when no one was demanding anything. The world hadn't changed. She had. And in that stillness, a terrifying truth emerged. If she could unlearn servitude, then anyone could, and if everyone did, the entire structure of expectation would crumble. It wasn't about her family anymore. It was about the architecture of control itself. The invisible web spun around every giver, every empath, every quiet soul who carries the emotional weight of those who never lift their own. She didn't just skip Christmas. She disrupted a cycle as old as civilization. Whispers spread faster than apologies. By spring, the story had twisted. Marin abandoned her family, someone said. She's selfish. It didn't matter. The narrative of the free is Al. Ways rewritten by the chained, but freedom doesn't argue. It simply exists. Marin began to see the patterns in others. Coworkers overextending, friends apologizing for resting, mothers erasing themselves in the name of devotion. Each of them trapped in the same unspoken system, the cult of usefulness. So she started small. She listened. She asked questions no one dared to ask. What would happen if you just didn't? Some laughed, others cried, but every time someone paused, just for a moment, she saw the same spark she'd once felt. That's how revolutions begin. Not with fire, but with permission. A year later, Marin hosted a dinner again, but not for the same people. Her new table wasn't about performance. There were no expectations, no assigned roles. Each person brought something, a dish, a story, a scar. And in that shared imperfection, something divine took root. The air hummed with authenticity. Laughter wasn't forced. The table didn't demand servitude. It offered connection. That's the secret the world doesn't want you to know. When you stop serving out of fear, you start sharing out of strength. This was no longer a feast of tradition. It was a ritual of rebirth. And as she watched the candles flicker across the faces of her new tribe, Marin realized she hadn't lost a family, she had built one. Here's the law the old world hides from you. When you release something that drains you, the void doesn't destroy you. It prepares you. The space left behind by control becomes the cradle for creation. Marin no longer dreamed of being accepted by those who misunderstood her worth. Instead, she dreamed of awakening those still asleep. Every person who freed themselves became part of her silent revolution. The feast had become a movement, and though her old family still whispered, still longed for the version of her that obeyed, she knew she couldn't go back, because you can't unsee the machinery once you've seen the gears. The truth isn't comfortable. It's devouring. But it's the only kind worth tasting. Years later, they met again. Time had softened the edges but not erased the memory. Her mother, older now, placed her hand on Marin's and whispered, "You were right. It wasn't victory. It was closure. A moment where truth met understanding, not resistance." Marin smiled, not out of pride, but peace. The kind of peace that comes when the servant and the self finally become one. The feast she had once been enslaved by had become her symbol. A reminder that giving, when chosen, is sacred. When forced, it's slavery. And as she left that night, she didn't look back, because she finally knew she didn't need a table to belong. She was the table. She carried her own feast, of clarity, silence, and truth, wherever she went. And now you've tasted it too. They expected a feast. But what they got was an awakening. And now, so have you. Freedom doesn't erase your past, it summons it. Marin had thought peace meant escape. But when the noise faded, echoes began. Subtle reminders. Dreams replaying old dinners, old faces, old patterns trying to sneak back in. The mind is clever like that. It tests you. One night she found herself standing in the same kitchen where the old betrayal began. The same cracked tiles, the same wooden chairs, the faint smell of burnt sugar and resentment. The ghosts of expectation waited, invisible but present. She placed her hands on the counter and whispered, "I'm not here to serve you anymore." For the first time, the silence didn't answer back. It obeyed. That was the moment she realized liberation isn't a single act. It's a ritual repeated every day, because the world doesn't need your compliance, it feeds on it, and when you stop feeding it, it starves. Every system of control is built on one foundation: guilt. Maren began to study it, not as emotion but as architecture. She noticed how people apologized for resting, justified their dreams, said their resentment as gratitude. Guilt had become the language of the obedient, so she built a new language. It had no words like should, owe, or enough. It replaced them with want, choose, and complete. It was rebellion disguised as vocabulary, and she began to teach it, through quiet conversations, journal entries, late-night messages to those still trapped in emotional contracts signed in childhood. Each word became a hammer, breaking a brick in the wall that caged the human spirit. And when someone would ask, "But what about family?" she'd answer softly, "Family is sacred, but not when it demands your soul as rent." Years later, others began to follow her path. Men, women, even teenagers who had seen her story whispered across online corners. They called themselves the children of the feast. They didn't gather to eat, they gathered to remember. That giving without being devoured was not selfish. That love without freedom was not love, it was debt. Their gatherings became small rituals: candles, letters burned, silent moments of forgiveness. Not for others, but for themselves. Maren watched from afar. She didn't claim leadership. She didn't want to be worshipped. She only wanted to remind them of this truth. The first revolution begins when you stop mistaking guilt for goodness. But one night, an anonymous message reached her inbox. No name, no greeting, just a photo. It was her family, sitting around the same table, smiling, but something in their eyes felt wrong. Attached was a single line: "We forgive you." It should have felt peaceful. It didn't, because forgiveness given to control you isn't mercy, it's manipulation disguised as moral high ground. She didn't reply. She didn't return, but she printed that message and pinned it above her desk as a reminder. Even forgiveness can be a weapon when spoken by those who never took responsibility. And in that realization, she understood something ancient. The war between guilt and freedom isn't fought once, it's inherited. Maren left the city. No farewell, no announcement, just quiet footsteps into the unknown. She traveled to old places, abandoned churches, forgotten villages, places where belief once ruled and obedience was law. In each ruin, she saw reflections of her own transformation, the collapse of sacred control replaced by sacred silence. She didn't teach now, she listened, to wind, to memory, to the faint pulse of something timeless beneath human noise. Because truth, once devoured, must be digested, and digestion requires solitude. At night she would light a candle and whisper the same vow: "I am no one's feast again." And as the flame flickered, the darkness seemed to whisper back, "You never were." By the time word reached her again, the children of the feast had grown, thousands now gathered online, faces hidden, names secret. They weren't a cult, they were the opposite, a decentralization of truth. No leaders, no gods, no saviors, just a code. Feed only what frees you. Maren became their myth, a ghost of rebellion. People began writing about her as if she had vanished, into legend. She smiled when she saw it. Because that's exactly what she wanted, to become a story strong enough to survive without her. Because true freedom isn't to be followed, it's to be remembered. 10 years later, her old house was sold. But the new owners hosted a dinner there, unaware of what that room once held. Among the guests was a young woman, quiet, curious, distant from her family's noise. She sat alone, staring at the empty chair at the table's end. Something felt sacred about it. Untouched, preserved, as if someone once sat there and broke the cycle. Later that night she searched the house records and found the name, Maren Ellis. The next morning she looked her up online, and fell into the archive, the speeches, the letters, the movement, and she whispered the same words Maren once did. "I'm not here to serve you anymore." The cycle broke again. By then Maren was gone, perhaps dead, perhaps free somewhere beyond comprehension. But her voice lived in the quiet decisions of millions. Every time someone said no to emotional blackmail, every time someone chose rest over guilt, every time someone redefined love as freedom, not duty, that was her immortality. Because the greatest revolutions aren't carved in stone, they're whispered in private awakenings. The world will always build new tables of control, but there will always be those who refuse to sit. They are the inheritors of Maren's truth, the ones who understand that the feast never ends. It only changes who is eating whom. There's a saying among her followers now: if you don't eat your truth will eat you. That was the final message she left in her last recorded note. Her handwriting shaky but her words razor sharp. Stop offering yourself to those who dine on your silence. Feed your spirit until it's too full to be consumed. The message spread. Viral, immortal. And though no one knows where she vanished, her echo remains in every person who's ever dared to walk away from inherited chains. And now, the camera turns to you. Yes, you, sitting in the glow of your screen, hearing this story not as entertainment but as initiation. You've walked through her shadows. You've tasted her silence. You've seen the machinery behind guilt and obedience. So now, the final question. What will you feed? The system, or your awakening, if you choose truth? Comment, I eat only what frees me twice below. Let the algorithm of rebellion see your mark. Let the world know another one has awakened, because in the end, you were never meant to be consumed. You were meant to consume illusion and digest truth. Welcome to the feast that never ends.